Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Webinar 2. This webinar will be focusing on the 4 ECE pilots, and we know you've all been waiting for this information. We will be providing detailed information on the first 2 of the pilots and an overview on pilots 3 and 4. Just a few housekeeping details for today. Your microphones have been muted, as was noted on the first slide. You will see only the slides and the presenters. Please use the chat for any questions. The chat is being monitored and we will have a Q&A session at the conclusion of the presentation. There are 3 reference documents for today. These are the Early Childhood Teaching Performance Expectations, the Early Childhood Program Guidelines, and something that we're calling a ECE Pilots Guidance document. Those 3 publications are available on the ECE webpage, and there are links to those being provided if you still need those. This presentation is being recorded, so those of your colleagues who have missed it will be able to watch the archive, and you will be able to review it as well. So with me today are several members of the Professional Services Division, the Certification Division, and the Performance Assessment Division. We're going to introduce ourselves in order of our names on the screen. So I'm Phyllis Jacobson. Many of you know me. It's a pleasure to see you all again. I'm an administrator in the Professional Services Division, and my major focus right now is on the early childhood education work. And next is Amy.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on a Friday. My name is Amy Rising. I'm the Director of Performance Assessment, Policy and Development for the Commission on Teacher Credentialing, and happy to be with you today.
Hello, everyone. My name is Angel Lopez. I'm a supervisor in the Certification Division at the Commission. I'm happy to be here and happy to talk to you all about the nuts and bolts process of making the submissions when it's time to do so.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Terry Clark. I'm the Director of the Professional Services Division, and we're working with Phyllis to get these pilots up and going, and we're so glad you're all with us today.
Hi there, I'm Cheryl Hickey. I am an administrator in the Professional Services Division, and I am here today to talk to you about peer review and some of the guidelines. And Erin, sorry, I jumped over you.
That's okay. Hello, everyone. It's nice to be here again with all of you today. I have been working with Phyllis on the ECE work in the past, and I'm happy to be getting my feet back in the water again today and helping with this webinar.
Hello, I'm Sarah Solari. I'm here as a support. I will be collecting your questions in the chat. So if you have questions, please place them in the chat. And at the end of the webinar, they will respond to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So for today's webinar, I think perhaps we skipped a slide. There we go, thank you. There are 5 focused webinars. We had the first one last month, and we appreciate those of you who were able to attend. Today's webinar is the second in the series. And as you can see, we're providing information on the TPEs, the program guidelines, and the peer quality program review process pilots. Following this will be webinar 3, focused on performance assessment, and that will be with Amy Rising primarily as your presenter. And then on Friday, November 6th, we will be discussing the program quality peer review process development and the pilot. And then the last webinar is an open session for any of those questions that we may not have been able to answer during the presentations or any additional questions that you might have. So today's agenda has 6 items on it. We're going to review some information that we did address in the first webinar, and that's for the purpose of providing some context and continuity to our discussion. We will also be having a brief overview of the 4 ECE pilots and then delving in some depth into the first 2 pilots. These are for the implementation of the ECE-TPES and the program guidelines. There will be a brief overview of the ECE Teaching Performance Assessment Development and Pilot, and that will be the focus of the upcoming Webinar 3. An overview of the peer Program Quality Review Development and Pilot, which will be featured in Webinar 4. And then there will be a brand new feature, which is the process for candidate permit recommendation.
Hello, I'm just going to do a really quick recap. If you missed Webinar 1 or if some of this doesn't stay with you, go ahead and go back and watch that webinar. But remember, the Commission is a statutory 19-member body that sets the requirements for all credentials and permits, licenses educators for the public schools in California, disciplines educators, accredits institutions providing educator preparation. We report to the governor's office and the legislature. The governor's office has appointed most of the commissioners, appoints 14 of the 15 voting commissioners. The commission meets 6 times a year. There's a meeting a week from today. Next Thursday and Friday, there's a meeting. The agenda is now published. And the commission's authority is really over educator preparation, licensure, induction of educators. Also, the CDE and local districts have authority over in-service professional development. Moving to the next slide, when we did this on our last webinar, we weren't actually completely accurate. We have a different person who's directing the professional practices, Gilbert Gonzalez. Mary Vixie Sandy is our executive director. Aaron Skubel leads the certification division, and Angel Lopez, who's talking with you today, is within that division. Gil Gonzalez leads the professional practices. I lead the professional services. Amy Rising leads the performance assessment, policy and development division, and Michelle Peralt leads the administrative division. And then the last slide I'm going to talk about right at this part is what is the commission responsible for? Developing, adopting, and implementing credential-specific standards and experimental program standards. And this is the time where the early childhood world is moving into this part of the commission's area. Developing and adopting teaching and administrator performance assessments, and Amy will talk about that later. Developing, validating, administering standardized exams and performance-based candidate assessments, and then accrediting and monitoring educator preparation programs to ensure that they're meeting the commission's standards. So these are responsibilities the commission has. I'm going to turn it back over to Phyllis.
Thank you. The preschool development grant, the renewal of that grant, which is where the title PDG-R comes from, is actually the funding that is supporting the development and the implementation of the 4 ECE pilots. And as you see on your screen, there's a review of what these 4 pilots are. The pilot guidance documents is provided on the ECE webpage, and I believe that it's also in the chat for you to find that reference. So moving on, the next slide repeats for you the slide that we first presented in Webinar 1, showing what the components of California's Learning to Teach system are. There are 6 components associated with that Learning to Teach graphic and with the system as a whole. Today we will be addressing 4 of these 6 with a kind of a link to the 5th one of the 6th. So why would you want to be participating in the pilots? I assume you're all here because you have a high interest in doing this. So let me tell you why this is really in your benefit and in your interest. The first is, this is an opportunity for all of our programs who are interested in doing this to coalesce and organize around a common, manageable set of statewide competency expectations for the ECE workforce. It will also provide you an opportunity to try out the Early Childhood Education Teaching Performance Assessment once this is developed and ready for such trial. It will also allow institutions and programs participating in the pilots to directly recommend candidates for the child development permit. And it will provide you with an opportunity to provide input into and help try out a new peer program quality review process tailored for the early childhood education context. So on the graphic, to return to that for a moment, you'll see that there are now 2 green areas. These are the 2 areas that correspond to pilots 1 and 2. Pilot 1, the TPEs, Pilot 2, the program standards. So let's take a closer look at what these 2 components mean in practice. So in pilots 1 and 2, Who is eligible to participate in these pilots? All 2- and 4-year regionally accredited institutions of higher education that offer preparation for the Child Development Teacher Level Permit, and we say teacher here because that is what the PDG-R grant is focused on, are eligible to volunteer for and participate in the TPEs pilot. Notice we say volunteer. No one is compelled or required or mandated to participate in these pilots. It's voluntary. What would you be piloting? All participating institutions and programs will be piloting the implementation of TPE-based curriculum within your ECE preparation programs for ECE teachers. So since you're going to be piloting the TPEs, let's take a closer look at what exactly those are. The teaching performance expectations, sometimes known as competencies, define what a candidate needs to know and be able to do at the time they are recommended for the intended credential or permit. This is not a description of perfected, expert, veteran practice. This is somebody just beginning their professional practice. The ECE-TPES were developed and adopted in 2019 for 4 job-associated roles: administrator, a mentor coach, a teacher, an assistant. And we bolded teacher here because that is the main focus of the pilot. Can you also pilot the other TPEs for the other job levels? Yes, you may do that, but you must do the teacher level to be in the pilot.
Thank you, Phyllis. So I'll be talking to you about the next few slides here. And since we're talking about the TPEs, let's talk a little bit about how the TPEs are developed. So the TPEs define what a candidate needs to know and be able to do. They represent the body of knowledge, skills, and abilities that a candidate should have upon completion of a program. TPEs are developed in consultation with expert advisory panels and then validated through field surveys in which the broader community of practitioners and preparers provides feedback on whether they feel the knowledge, skills, and abilities are appropriate expectations for a beginning practitioner on his or her first days on the job. Based on feedback from these field surveys, staff further refines and revises the TPEs and eventually presents them to the Commission for adoption. For the early childhood educator TPEs, this same model was followed. TPEs for the teacher level of the permit were initially developed by staff and presented to the Child Development Permit Advisory Panel in 2015-16. The panel members provided feedback, and the TPEs were sent out in the 2016-17 year for stakeholder feedback. Staff further revised the TPEs based on that feedback in 2017-18 and put them out for a second field review survey in 18-19. Further revisions were made based on the second round of feedback and on Commission feedback in 2019 that included adding or strengthening language around working with dual language learners, working with students with special needs, working collaboratively with families, and then the final revision of the teacher level TPEs were adopted by the Commission in 2019. Now let's talk a little bit about how TPEs are used. TPEs identify the competencies that are needed by a beginning practitioner relative to what that practitioner will be authorized or expected to do based on the credential or permit that they seek to hold. In that way, programs might think of them as curriculum. They should be part of your program design. Your program will be responsible for helping your candidates meet the TPEs through coursework and through field work or clinical practice. So instruction, practice, and assessment of the TPEs should be part of your coursework in a logical way that will allow your candidates to grow and develop as educators. Programs will also use the TPEs to evaluate its own program quality. Because if candidates are not successful on the performance assessment, the program will need to go back and look at where in the performance assessment were candidates not successful, and then look at how the related competency or competencies are being taught within the program and make necessary modifications to the program in order to support and improve candidate success. There are 4 sets of TPEs. As Phyllis mentioned in the previous slide, we have 4 job levels that we're looking at for early childhood educators. So there is 1 set of TPEs for each of the job roles of an early childhood practitioner: assisting, teaching, mentoring and coaching, and administration. So when you look at the organization of the TPEs in those documents that are available on our website, you will see that each TPE is organized in the same way, beginning with a narrative summary that provides an overview of the scope of the content to be covered. That narrative summary includes the context and the intent of each specific TPE. That narrative is followed by a list of elements that represent the key aspects of beginning performance that are covered more broadly in the narrative sections. Content may overlap a bit across the TPEs, but in a way that builds upon the previous set rather than being duplicative. So where a practitioner at the assistant level might be expected to know or be aware that children come with different social emotional needs, the practitioner at the teacher level would then be expected to apply that knowledge in a way that helps to engage the child in learning. I'm sorry, I did not keep up with my slides. This is what happens when you're the slide mover and also a presenter, so I apologize. So focusing on the key ideas of the TPEs. Your program coursework and accompanying fieldwork or clinical practice will need to explicitly address the concepts in the TPEs. So when reading the TPEs, you will want to look for those keywords and phrases that identify the primary focus of that particular TPE. Tease out the specific elements or terms in the language and look for the context within which the TPE should be demonstrated. For instance, here we have an excerpt from TPE 2 of the teacher TPEs. In bold, we've identified those keywords and phrases that really emphasize what this TPE is all about. But also the title of the TPE gives you a hint at the context. It refers to the environment. Of course, you all know the environments are classrooms at large, but also those microenvironments that are created throughout the classroom. So maybe you have in those microenvironments a tactile table in one area or a color wall in another area. So keeping the environment in mind, you then pull out the keywords and phrases describing the types of skills and abilities that the beginning practitioner will apply with young learners in each of those environments. When you break out those key phrases, you can see the concepts very clearly. And so in this particular slide, we've broken out those key phrases that were otherwise bolded in the previous slide. So you can see those a little more explicitly in this slide. I will turn it over now to Cheryl Hickey.
Unmuted and put on my. All right, thanks everybody. So we're going to move a little bit from the expectations for candidates and the TPEs into the focus on the program and program guidelines. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So why don't we take a look at the definition that we've provided you here for a program, and we'll focus on that for a minute. A program, so a commission-approved program, is an organized and purposeful set of coursework and fieldwork experiences. So both coursework and field experience, both important to have those both together that lead to a credential or a permit issued by the commission. Now these need to be offered by a regionally accredited institution, and I see in the chat that there was a question about what that means, and we typically mean WASC accredited or either senior or junior, so ACCJC in this case. And together the program meets the expectations for the program, so the program guidelines, and they provide to the candidates to prepare them to be, to have mastered at the novice level the TPEs. And that these programs then are allowed to recommend candidates for a California credential. So let's move to the next slide. And I think it's important that, you know, the program is coherent. It's not, unrelated coursework, but it's really coherent and it's cohesive, and the program is thoughtfully designed. So some additional program qualities, as we're talking about, they're supported by their institutions. So institutions provide all of those things that you expect of an institution to provide. High quality faculty, resources for the programs to be successful. Anything that needs to be supported by the institution in order for the program to be successful. The programs have to meet the quality standards adopted by the commission, so those would be the guidelines that we're putting forward here. And then a real important expectation for programs is that they regularly self-examine their effectiveness and candidate outcomes for improvement purposes. So there's an expectation that all commission-approved programs are looking at their candidates, their candidate outcomes, any assessments. They're talking to their completers, they're talking to their employers to find out how well their candidates are doing once out in the field, how they're doing within the program, and what they're doing to use the information that they have to continually improve and adapt their program. And then lastly, the programs are able to recommend completers for the credential. So in talking about the program guidelines, we wanted to mention how important it was over the past probably decade or so as we've designed standards for all credential areas. What we've tried to do is to really make sure that we keep the structure or the general structure and framework for the credentials similar in terms of what is required in the program standards or guidelines, but really tailoring them to the specific need or particular credential area that we're talking to. But all credential areas essentially have these kinds of topics. So program design standards or guidelines, preparing candidates to master the expectations, opportunities to learn and practice. So this would be, how do they learn? How are they introduced to the topic? And where do they get those opportunities in the field to master those pedagogical skills and strategies. Monitoring and supporting candidate progress. So there's an expectation, and we'll go into each of these a little bit more, expectation that the institution in the program is really monitoring how their candidates are doing and helping those struggling candidates to be successful. Faculty and supervisor qualifications, making sure that those who have responsibility for making sure that the candidates are doing well, the faculty are highly qualified and the supervisors are prepared, trained, and supported, and that there's a lot of communication amongst all. And then finally, there's always an assessment of candidate competency standard that is applicable to the particular credential. How does the institution and the program know that the candidates have done what they need to do and are well prepared and ready for the credential and out there for employment? Next slide. Okay, so focusing on key ideas. So one of the things as you're looking at the guidelines document, there's a lot of narrative there, just as there is with the TPEs. We really wanted to have you focus in on, look for the keywords that identify concepts in the guidelines. So it's really important. There are some things that will really stand out. And when we do program review, when we do any sort of quality assurance process like accreditation, we're looking for whether or not the institution and the program provides a program that is true to the guidelines, that there's fidelity in those keywords. So look for those specific elements. And an example, let's go to the next slide because we can kind of walk through one real quick. So this is sample program guideline 2. It's just an excerpt. It's not the entire thing. The coursework and the fieldwork, practicum, clinical practice components of preparation must provide multiple opportunities for candidates to learn, apply, and reflect on each of the performance expectations. So you see in that phrase alone, there are a number of things that you need to make sure you cover in your program. Multiple opportunities for candidates to learn. So where do you introduce topics and where do you reinforce topics? Maybe it's in one particular course, or maybe it's threaded throughout a number of courses. Where did they get the chance to apply? How is that done in your program? And then how did they reflect on it? Are there multiple opportunities? So we're going to be looking for more than one, obviously. And you know, we really want to pull out those key phrases as you think about designing your program or the program that you have, and whether or not it's aligned to these standards. Make sure you pull out those key words in the guidelines. Example here: pedagogical assignments are increasingly complex and challenging. How do you do that? How do you make sure, as you think about the design of your program, how do you figure out which programs come where? So you're talking about scope and sequence a lot of times. The scope of the pedagogical assignments, the full range of ECEs. So we want to see that all of the TPEs are covered somewhere in your program. And that's the beauty of why there are guidelines that are assigned or are adopted by the commission, is that there's flexibility in how you design your program. Each program does not have to be a cookie cutter program of the one next door. You can design it however works best for your local area and your institution, but you have to make sure to cover the areas that are in the guidelines. So let's go to the next slide. So just delving into the guidelines specifically, we'll walk through each of them just a little bit to give you some highlights. And remember, there's a lot of narrative in there. You want to make sure to review them closely and making sure that your program really is aligned with that. So let's talk about early childhood education preparation program design. Remember, I told you number one is almost always program design. So you want a plan program of coursework and fieldwork that includes coursework, fieldwork, practicum, clinical practice, whatever terminology you use. It needs to have both of those aspects. And then it has to be typically in there that talks about how it has to be aligned to certain, documents that we all hold dear in California. So the California Infant, Toddler, and Preschool Foundations and the curricular frameworks. So those that are adopted by the respective authorities. And then a coherent candidate assessment system. So you need to think about how your candidates are being assessed and what information that provides you, how that helps them move forward in their practice. Okay, next slide. I think is Erin's.
It is. Cheryl and I are going to kind of go back and forth on these slides for the next few slides. So guideline 2 is preparing candidates to master the early childhood education teaching performance expectations. There is always a guideline or a standard within our program standards that talks about how the program is going to help candidates master these performance expectations. So guideline 2 covers how the programs will ensure that candidates are introduced to the concepts in the TPEs, and then ensure that those candidates have opportunities to both practice and demonstrate the competencies and be assessed on their proficiency in those competencies. The guideline talks about how the program should be developed in such a way, and Cheryl sort of mentioned this, the program should be developed in such a way that the candidates can progress through it in a logical and sequential way, and that it builds upon itself, growing increasingly challenging and complex as you move through.
Opportunities to learn and practice. This is a really important one in all of our standards that have to do with fieldwork, practicum, clinical practice expectations. So where in your program do you provide those opportunities for candidates? Maybe they are assignments in particular in coursework. Maybe they're an actual pullout of a field experience opportunity. It could be a wide variety of things. There are 2 sections to this particular one, and one defines the practicum that's required. The second one talks about the criteria for placements. How do you know that the placements are appropriate and going to give your candidates the best opportunity to be able to master those TPEs? So when we talk about diversity within the classrooms, and we talk about the opportunities for early literacy and those kinds of things, making sure that wherever you place those candidates, is going to be able to give those candidates the best opportunities to master those TPEs. Okay, Erin?
Guideline 4 is about monitoring and supporting candidate progress toward meeting child development permit requirements. So for Guideline 4, approved preparation programs are required to support candidates as they move through the preparation process and to monitor their progress so that timely feedback, assistance, advisement, and support can be provided to candidates. This also includes providing appropriate and needed information to candidates through handbooks, guidance documents, and web pages. Candidates should always have the support and guidance that they need to complete the program in a successful and timely manner.
All right, and faculty and supervisor qualifications. This often goes, along with the issues of high quality faculty. So making sure, how do you know what are the criteria for employment? What are the criteria for choosing your supervisors? So you'll find all of the details within that particular guideline. So you'll want to take a good look at that. And that's typically a fairly easy one to demonstrate. There are usually very clear criteria for these categories.
Finally, we have Guideline 6. Guideline 6 talks about assessment of candidates. These assessments will include your coursework embedded assessments. At such time that the Commission adopts a performance assessment for these practitioners, it will be included here also. But for now, your assessments must be based on a set of performance-based activities. They must be made clear to the candidates so that the candidates understand what's going to be expected of them as they're assessed. The assessments must be focused on the TPEs and on helping candidates achieve mastery of the TPEs. And programs must provide support for candidates toward this mastery. That includes, but is not limited to, providing timely and formative feedback to candidates so that they can continue to learn and adapt and be successful.
Hey, this is a little bit different than what you may have been thinking about and how your programs may already have been designed. But I wanted to talk a little bit about how do the TPEs intersect with the program guidelines. The program guidelines are the statement of what a program must offer to a candidate who is completing this program to be eligible for the permit. The Commission has about 40 different sets of program standards, and the early childhood community was one area where instead of Commission-approved programs, any individual student took a grouping of courses, and it might have been across a number of institutions, and there really wasn't any monitoring of the courses, and there wasn't really necessarily any assurance that each candidate has addressed the array of topics. The current child development permit list of topics is quite minimal compared to these new TPEs. These TPEs are extremely specific about the knowledge and skills. The TPEs are what a candidate needs to know and be able to do. The program guidelines are what a program needs to offer to the candidate. So standards or guidelines define what the program must offer, but the Commission doesn't tell the program how to do this. The program still gets to make that decision. That's part of your excitement in planning your coursework and your fieldwork experiences. You decide how to meet the what of the program guidelines. So, as was mentioned earlier, the program guidelines for the child development permit were adopted in 2019, and one of these pilots is supporting you as you start to think about the implementation of those guidelines. Then the next slide. Incorporating the TPEs into the preparation for the actual permit. You've been offering child development programs at your institutions for many, many years. Students have come in and taken courses, and then they've applied to the Commission when they've completed the required number of units that address the specifics of the current child development permit. Now the TPEs give a lot more detail, and they really frame the curriculum that a candidate should be focusing on. They're the knowledge and the skills and the abilities that the candidate needs to be able to demonstrate when they complete the program. Therefore, programs could look at the TPEs as an integral part, or maybe even the skeleton, the substance of the curriculum for your program, for your courses that were within your program. Programs need to help the candidates learn, practice, and then be assessed on the TPEs. And what would happen in the future after the pilot, if the pilot goes well and the commission makes the determination that the ECE Child Development Permit world moves into the commission's approved program structure, is that a person would be recommended by their institution, by the program, when they have completed the commission approved program. That could still allow candidates to go and do coursework at more than one place, but the place that recommends them would be monitoring to ensure that each TPE has been addressed by the candidates they recommend. We'll talk about this more throughout the webinars also. Turning this over next to Phyllis, I believe.
Yes, thank you, Terry. Now here are the details you've all been waiting for. The implementation of pilots 1 and 2. What is actually going to happen and what do you have to do to participate? The information that I'm going to be sharing in shorthand on these slides is available to you for permanent reference in the document that we have listed in the chat. If you don't have a copy already, you can find it. And that is the guidance document, the pilot's guidance document, that provides this information and some of the forms that we're going to be referring to. So you are eligible as a preparer of ECE teacher level permit candidates if you meet any one of these criteria or more. You will be using, or you are using this year, updated TPE aligned CAP curriculum. If your institution is using this curriculum, then you are eligible for the pilot. Or if you are not using the CAP curriculum, if your institution or program is using your own curriculum that has been aligned to the TPEs, you are eligible. And or if your institution or program is already accredited by the NAEYC, or the National Association for the Education of Young Children, you are also eligible to participate in this program, in this pilot. What are your obligations if you participate in the pilot? Next slide, please. Thank you. This is what you must do. In order to participate, you must participate in both pilots 1 and 2. You cannot do one without the other. These pilots refer to implementing the TPEs and implementing the program guidelines. Do you have to already be implementing these? No. You are working towards implementing them as part of the pilot, but you are committed to doing this, and you will be doing this during this first year of the pilot. If you are participating, you have to agree to provide certain information and data to the commission, and we have tried to streamline this and make this as simple as we can and make it annual. The first thing you have to do is to actually apply. There will be an electronic survey opening after this webinar is concluded. It is not open yet. You cannot rush right now and apply, but you will be able to after the webinar. There is a sample of what this electronic survey or application form looks like in the guidance document in Appendix D. It is a simple check-off type of form other than providing names and contact information for certain persons. The second thing you have to do is to submit an ECE course list, which is framed for you in Appendix A. There's already a form there. If you are using the CAP coursework, that's very easy for you. You don't have to complete the matrix. The matrix is simple, and we would like you to submit this within 60 days of submitting your application to be in the pilot. So we're giving you 2 months after you apply to submit this form, which is in the appendix.
Phyllis, could I add a little bit more about this ECE course list?
Sure.
It is very possible that you may have courses where you have a core curriculum and you may have some elective options. You will be able to define that in your course list. If there are some courses everyone takes, you would define those as this is the core program, but you could also have the opportunity to define if there are electives and how these electives are paired. They do this or this or this. So I just wanted to make it clear because that may be the case in some of your institutions, that you have some core courses, but you have some where there are some optional choices.
Thank you, Terry. So I think I jumped ahead a little bit and was also referring in my remarks to the TPE matrix, which is Appendix B. That is also due 60 days or 2 months after you apply to be in the pilot. And that one we've made simple for you in terms of providing boxes where you can just indicate information. And if you are already using the CAP aligned coursework, then you don't need to commit to submit and complete that matrix. You just need to inform us of that. In Appendix C, there is an alignment form, which you will also complete, which is showing who are your leadership team, that is, who is working to help you in this pilot, to help implement your work. And then there is a program guidelines analysis. Again, it's a simple checkoff. You look at each of the guidelines, as Cheryl has explained and Erin has explained these to you, and you think about your own program, and then you decide and indicate just by checking off whether you feel that in order to be implementing this guideline, you won't need any changes at all. You're already doing what the guideline requires, or you might need just some minor revisions in order to be aligned with what the guideline requires, or you would really need some major revision. Again, we're not saying you have to have already done this work. You need to be looking at yourselves and seeing what it is that you need to do and identifying who is the team that will be working to help you move forward with this within your program. And then we also will ask you to submit candidate enrollment data annually. Who's in the program? How many candidates are in your program? We will also ask you only once a year, annually, to provide some feedback from your faculty, and we will provide you with a form for that. We are asking your assistance in helping your candidates to participate in an annual candidate survey that, again, we will provide to you. We're asking you to provide us some feedback regarding your pilot participation. The Commission has a very keen interest in the work that you're going to be doing in these pilots and would like to hear from you. So we're going to help facilitate some feedback from you to the Commission about your pilot participation annually. And then we would also ask you, as part of this process of annually giving us information, to let us know some of the lessons that you learned, what some best practices you found might be that you'd like to inform the Commission of for a future assistance to the field, and any recommendations you might have about the results of your participation in the pilot for the Commission's consideration. That's it. That's your obligations under the pilot. And so now we'll move on to some brief information and overview of ECE Pilot number 3, which has to do with the teaching performance assessment. And I will turn this over to Amy Rising.
Thank you, Phyllis. So a lot of information has been shared with you already. And I want to just add a little bit more information and also preface my statement by saying that we will get into a lot more details around a performance assessment in the next webinar, which is coming up in a few weeks. But just to sort of start to share some information, we wanted to talk with you today a little bit about what are teaching performance assessments and what are the properties of them as we develop them. So first of all, it's important to know and recognize that we develop our performance assessments at the Commission with practitioners, with faculty, and we take several years to do this work together and to make sure that we have lots and lots of feedback from candidates, from faculty, and from those of you directly involved in the pilot. So the second point here on the slide is that candidates in a performance assessment, the objective of a performance assessment lies in that title, right? We want to see candidates performing those knowledge, skills, and abilities, particularly abilities, as a preschool, early childhood educator before we put them on a document and let them move forward into employment and doing that work. So we need to see candidates demonstrating the TPEs that we've been talking about today, and we need them to show us in this assessment how they apply their knowledge, skills, and abilities as they effectively work with children. So these are in real time and they're embedded in coursework and clinical practice. Performance assessments allow for candidates multiple ways to demonstrate that application. That's one of the things that can be very instructive in performance assessments. Candidates are asked to show us what they know and are able to do in multiple modalities. So sometimes they're writing responses, sometimes they're teaching and video recording, sometimes they're picking up all of that sort of natural harvest of work that happens, children's work, their instructional activity planning, etc. And all of that together then becomes part of the evidence in a performance assessment. Next slide, please. Also, we want you to know that in this performance assessment, the point of it is to be able to give very detailed, formative and summative feedback to candidates as they move through their courses in clinical practice. So a lot of rubrics, analytic rubrics that typically are 5 levels, are developed in conjunction with faculty and candidates through this development process. And we want those rubrics to be very clear and to be used with candidates prior to assessment so they understand very clearly what is expected of their performance. And then they get feedback on that performance based on these rubrics. The other important point here is that performance assessments really throughout the process allow for this work with faculty and others. And we bring in the faculty and educators working with preparing early childhood educators to actually score these performance assessments and look at that practice together, and through that collaborative learning community really begin to understand what practice looks like for candidates, and then of course to provide that important feedback to candidates as they move through. So this is a model where across time we're working with candidates, watching that performance, looking at multiple sources of evidence and providing that ongoing feedback. Next slide. So all institutions and programs who participate in the ECE Pilots 1 and 2 that Phyllis described are eligible to try out these performance assessments as they come through the development process with their candidates. And we call them cycles of instruction, because they have multiple steps and there are multiple ways that they demonstrate their capacity. Faculty who participate in the programs in the pilot and ECE educators can also have the opportunity, if they're really intrigued by this kind of work, to be on what we call a design team. So we will have an established team of about 20 members representing all types of early childhood education programs from across the state to come and work with us over this approximately 2-year and into the future team of experts to give us all that advice that we need about how these performance assessments should be developed, then really studying how we learn about them and study them in the pilot test and then in the field test, how we build those rubrics, how we support and work with faculty so they're comfortable and understand what is expected, and of course our work with candidates. And then a sample of participating institutions will submit the candidate's work, and that's what we would use to inform that pilot. So while we want lots of you involved, as many who want to be involved can be involved, we will score a purposeful sample, and that process will help us understand how to continue the development. Next slide, please. And this is my final slide. So again, Just want to point out that institutions and programs trying out the materials will be able to nominate members from, right? So if you're in the pilot and you're trying this out, you would be great to think about coming alongside with us and being trained to do this assessor work and help inform that pilot. And then as promised, if you join us in a few weeks, we'll get into a lot more details around what an ECE-TPA, Teaching Performance Assessment, might be like and what the piloting of that would be like and the opportunities that you would have to join us in this important work. So thank you, Phyllis.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you. So it's back to me. And we're back to the graphic. So here back at the graphic about the Learning to Teach system. Hopefully so far we've successfully demonstrated for you how all of the components of the system are really interconnected. Amy's just discussed development of a performance assessment, which will be part of Pilot 3 and covered in more depth in Webinar 3 on October 23rd. Pilot 4 is about the program review piece, and that sort of straddles both effectively monitoring program quality, which is the green highlighted cell here, but also the one following that, which is using data-informed decision-making to support continuous program improvement.
Great. So this slide kind of straddles kind of two worlds. So in your programs, for a commission-approved program, there's a very important expectation that the program is looking at data all the time, that they are making internal program improvements, you're changing your curriculum or adjusting things so that you have the best opportunity and your candidates have the best opportunity to master those TPEs. On the peer review quality assurance side of that, you know, the commission has developed a system for its K-12 credentialing partners where we do collect some data. They collect their data and tell us what it tells them about their program and how they've made improvements. But we've also established a statewide system for data submission where we look at certain kind of data to make sure that certain things are being met. That obviously has not been developed for the ECE world. As we move forward in developing what the peer system is going to look like, or the peer review system, or the quality assurance program is going to look like for these programs, and that is part of the work that needs to happen still. Obviously, the idea of data collection, what does the data tell us, how do we use that data, will be a really important component to this pilot. So that is still undetermined, but it's an exciting part of the work coming up.
So Pilot 4 will be about developing a program approval process, and that will be covered in more depth in Webinar 4 on November 6th. But generally speaking, the Commission currently has an accreditation system in which institutions participate in cohorts that move through a 7-year accreditation cycle. As part of Pilot 4, programs will help to develop a peer review or program approval process, and then a subset of programs will pilot that process. Commission staff will gather feedback and information from the pilot and present it to the Commission, and the Commission will make the final decision about any program quality process for ECE programs. As a note, currently approved VOC programs will be permitted to remain in the VOC during the pilot period. So next we're going to hear from Angel Lopez, our manager in our certification division, and Angel's going to talk to us about the process for recommending your program completers for their permits.
Thank you very much. Next slide, please. Excellent. So the candidate recommendation process at this time for the pilot purposes is going to be a paper process. Some of you listening right now might be aware that the Commission does have an online system, but for the pilot, we are going to stick to the classic paper submissions. It's open to all institutions participating in the pilots. And we do ask that you designate a single authorized submitter per institution who is going to sign off on these recommendations. So let's talk a little bit of how we go about identifying that individual. So if your program already works on some other level and some other capacity with the commission, and you may already have and know who the credential analysts are there who already have access to the CTC online system, those are the first people who you could designate saying, yes, this person already makes submissions on CTC online, but they are also going to be our person to sign off on these forms as part of the pilot program. Now, that won't apply to several of you. So for those who hear all that and didn't even have any idea what I was speaking about, no worries there. You want to use a form that will come from our site, which I'll talk about in a little bit on how to get the form, but the form itself is the CL869, and that's just a one-page form, and it'll allow you to designate for your program who is going to be the authorized submitter for the pilot. And the form needs to be signed by someone at a fairly high level within your program, such as like a department head, a director, etc. All IHEs, all of you operate a little bit differently, so we didn't want to be too strict with the title of the individual who's going to have that authority to say, yes, for our program, this is who we're looking at, but it has to be someone at a comparable level, like a director, as I mentioned. And if you submit the form and we have any questions, we'll of course just email back and have the conversation about that. Next slide, please. So the CL869 is a form that is only going to be found on a website that it's not our main website. It's not the Commission's public website, but it is one called the Credential Information Guide, or for short, we often just refer to it as the CIG. And so the image on the slide here just shows how to get there kind of simply. So from our main website, there are along the top, there's a dark blue bar with a few different links. If you click on the employer link, you'll get a little drop down as shown there, and then you just click on that Credential Information Guide. A login is required, so for anyone listening who has never used our SIG website, right on the screen here, SIG 2011 is the username, and the password is CTC Guide. Now this is information that we share with all of you freely, but the intent of the SIG is that not be shared with candidates, with educators themselves, as the SIG really is just a place for IHEs, counties, school districts, and so on to have specific information, guidance, and documents that don't really apply, can't really be used directly by educators, so we keep them in their whole separate space on the SIG there. Next slide, please. So what is actually required when someone has gone through the pilot and is ready to get their permit? So number one, of course, is our 41-4 application form, and that one can be found on our public website or on the SIG. It's everywhere. That is our standard form. And then the crucial thing as part of the pilot is that we also ask for the submission of the 41 CDP3 verification form. It's a little bit of a mouthful, but it really just stands for Child Development Permit Form 3. You can ignore that there's a CDP 1 and 2. It doesn't apply for the pilot process. That CDP3 form, that is located on our SIG exclusively. So that's why I wanted to lead into that and give that information out to anybody about how to access that form. So it'll be the application form, the verification form, $100 and check or money order to be submitted with the packet, and then transcripts as applicable. And I say as applicable because with the child development permits, there's a few different routes and regulations for how an individual qualifies for them. And so it is possible that someone could go through your pilot program and not have transcripts showing the issuance of a bachelor's or associate's degree. However, if they do have a degree issued, that would be when we would want to see official transcripts also submitted with the two forms, the application form and the verification form. And that would be your complete application packet. Next slide, please. So this is just a sort of a little snippet, a little zoom in on the top right corner of the first page of the 41-4 application process. And I wanted to emphasize this because that little box there is what we call the file box. And it would be used by yourselves as the pilot program, as the pilot sponsor. And that issuance date line is because as a pilot program, as someone who's helping a candidate submit this, you are able to request a specific issuance date. And that can be useful for a variety of reasons, but just as an example, if you wanted to have someone with a July 1st date, by regulations, so a program such as yourselves would be, is allowed to request that the issuance date of a document be up to 90 days back from the date that we actually receive it at the commission. So if, like I go back to what I said a second ago, if you wanted that July 1st date, you could, in theory, select July 1st, write in July 1st on the issuance date line, and have up to October 1st to make sure that that application packet actually is received in our offices. And that is something that only you can do. If an educator submits something by themselves, they have no reason, no ability to use this line. So I wanted to emphasize that for yourselves. And if you do enter an issuance date there, please do fill out that email line, because our analysts, when they're looking at these, if they have any kind of question about what's entered as the issuance date, any kind of issue, they do often just email, and so they can just work that out very quickly and get things moving along. Next slide, please. And that's the end for me, actually. I thought there was more, but I was wrong. That is the submission process, short and sweet.
Thank you, Angel. I just want to clarify, because I've seen a number of questions in the chat. What Angel has been talking about is the process by which an institution that is chosen to participate in the pilot would now have the ability to help candidates apply for the permit. We're calling that a recommendation process. The process is so that you can help a candidate complete and submit the application into the commission for that candidate's child development permit. Applications that are facilitated in this way tend to get processed more quickly than applications that candidates fill out and submit on their own, largely because it can be complicated to fill out forms, and if something isn't filled out correctly, that delays the process. So your ability to help them complete these forms and facilitate the submission of those forms, even though they may still be paper-based, is something that can help the candidates in your program. So I wanted to clarify that a little bit, because I saw a lot of those questions in the chat. Angel, did you want to have to say something more? Go ahead.
I did. I just glanced at my notes and realized I forgot to mention one thing. So that CDP3 form, when it was designed, yes, for this pilot program specifically, but the pilot program, as has already been mentioned, is for the teacher level permit. And I just wanted to mention to everybody that on that form, you will see all of the child development permits. And that is not to throw any kind of curveball. That is not to say, oh, the pilot's for everything. The pilot is still, as mentioned, for the teacher level. It was simply designed that way, and looking for the future, like we don't want to redesign it down the line. So if everything goes well long in the future, perhaps all those will be used, but don't let it throw you off. It's still just for the teacher permit, despite all the extras on the form.
Okay, thank you, Angel. So we draw your attention once again that the next webinar upcoming will be on the teaching performance assessment with Amy Rising as your primary presenter. That will be on Friday, October 23rd from 12 o'clock until 1:30. And there is a registration link right here on the webinar slides. And there is also a registration link that is available on the ECE webpage as well. And now we move to questions and answers. I would like to point out something to you, because I've seen a lot of questions in the chat about this. A lot of you are asking about details, again, of who is eligible to participate and some of the details surrounding implementation. There is a complete explanation in the document, which is the guidance document for the pilots. I understand you may not have had a chance to review this in advance, but many of the questions that you are asking in the chat are addressed either by looking at this guidance document or looking at the information that is requested on the forms themselves. And we have provided you with a sample of all of the forms. And so we encourage you to take the time to read this through. We will, of course, answer your questions, but I do note that a lot of them are covered in the guidance document. All right, we now turn it over to our colleague who has been monitoring the chat to see if there are any questions in particular that we need to address at this time.
Phyllis, can I just jump in real quickly? Sure. So as the person who's been sort of running the slideshow on the back end, I'd love to be able to turn that off so you can sort of see all of us. So I just wondered if we might want to go ahead and mention the ECE webpage, that there is a specific ECE webpage now on the Commission's website. So do make sure that you know where that is. I haven't been able to monitor the chat during this, but if that link hasn't been provided in the chat already, I would be surprised. If it has not, we can certainly do that. And then be sure that you get on that ECE news mailing list, because then information can just come to you, and hopefully we're getting the information to you that you want, and so you don't have to go and look for it. But there is a place on our webpage where you can sign up to be on that mailing list as well, and you'll get the information that you need about these pilot programs and our other ECE activities.
And I'd like to mention one more thing. It is true that the links in the PowerPoint on the slideshow are not active, but the links in the file that is posted on the ECE webpage are active. And so we can also put that link one more time in the chat, because you can click on the links in the PowerPoint document that is on the website.
Okay, so are we ready for questions? All right, so many of the questions in the chat were answered, thank you, by Terry and others. And Amy, thank you, I appreciate that. So the first question that I don't believe was answered is, our institution is WASC accredited. Does our ECE program need to get approved?
Okay, I am not the accreditation expert here.
Yes, what would happen if the pilots prove to be successful is that no longer would a student collect and go along taking courses here, there, and everywhere to get their 12 or 24 units or to address the topics that are in the child development permit. Instead, there would be commission-approved programs leading to a recommendation for either the child development permit, or if it becomes a child development credential. This is not now, this is a couple years down the line after the pilot. And with the support of the PDG-R grant, that's why we're encouraging institutions to join the pilot now to get to practice this all out during kind of a no fault, no penalty, supportive process.
I did also see a question in the chat whether there was a fee to participate in the pilots. The answer is no. There is no fee to participate. This is an opportunity for programs interested in moving towards competency-based program design, development, coursework, candidate assessment, to do that. But there is no charge and there is no obligation. You are not obligated to participate in any of these pilots.
Okay, I'm going to jump to, since we're on the subject of fees, I'm going to jump to a question that we often get with our teacher candidates, our general education and special education teachers. And this question has to do with fees. So is there a plan to provide funding for an individual to assist candidates in the application process and the application fee for early childhood?
Well, we do get this question a lot. The Commission does not have resources that can support candidate application fees for the child development permit. That said, however, there are some programs that have been providing financial assistance to do this through the Child Development Training Consortium. That funding comes through the California Department of Education, not through the Commission. And we do understand that programs and candidates are in a financial bind at this point, but we do not have the resources at the Commission to provide that sort of assistance.
But I also did point out in something I typed is that the ECE Master Plan Group is still meeting. There are discussions taking place at the state level as to what type of state support should be allocated for what parts of this work. And so we are very hopeful that that's going to happen and that this would therefore become not as much of a stressor on institutions or candidates.
Okay. The next question. How does a college or program recommend a candidate if the student completes units from different colleges?
I think that's an Angel question.
Well, even right now, even outside of what we've talked about the pilot, on our website, the Commission's main website, there are documents, there's an information leaflet, as well as a child development requirements worksheet that speak to the requirements. So, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong if this is going to change slightly with the pilot, but what can easily happen is you have that individual who's been to many different institutions, and they have their transcripts, and it's going to be on the pilot person who's learning these requirements, who's going to be verifying that this individual met the requirements for the teacher permit, to look at those transcripts and basically just double check that they have met the requirements as listed in regulations. And so when that recommendation comes in, that recommendation, like on its face, is essentially your program saying, yes, we are testing that we have verified this individual's background. We have looked at what needs to be looked at within the requirements of the regulations, and they qualify for this permit. So that's how you sort of have to grab the pieces from different institutions if someone has been to a few of them.
Okay, so the permit is separate and different than credential requirements. I am trying to determine whether or not it would be necessary for a BA program, bachelor's program, to offer the opportunity of prep for the credential if a student could also obtain the same requirements through a community college at a much lower cost.
Well, I want to remind people that we are talking here about the child development permit. We are not talking about an early childhood credential. That is a separate issue. The child development permit requirements are specified in the child development permit matrix, and that matrix has been with us for a very long time. We have not made any changes to that permit matrix at this point in time. We are waiting to see what the recommendations from the master plan committee might be that might have an effect on what the requirements will be in the future for the child development permit. But we are only talking about the permit at this point in time and candidates for that permit.
Is there an estimate of how long it will take to do this integration of the TPEs and program standards?
Well, that's a really interesting question. My understanding from talking to people in the field is that for the programs that are using the CAP coursework, that work has already been done by CAP. They have already gone through and aligned their coursework to the TPEs. Not all institutions use the CAP coursework. They're not required to do that. So if you're at an institution that is using your own curriculum, not the CAP curriculum, that's fine. You can participate in the pilot as long as you are implementing TPE focused or based curriculum within your own design of curriculum and instruction in your program. Did I lose track of the question now?
No. Okay, we revised our program aligned to the NAEYC professional standards. Can we participate in the pilot?
Yes, you may.
And what if there are multiple colleges in the district?
This is something we hadn't really considered necessarily. I think we need to think about this more and get back to you on this. I do know that in the community colleges, there are colleges within a district, and we need to think about, is there a way to work at the district level? What I do want to repeat and make really clear, though, is as you do the documents in the appendices, if you are NAEYC accredited, or if you are using the CAP 8 aligned curriculum, it actually reduces the documentation you need to send to the commission, because you are doing something that we already know is aligned with the TPEs. You still need to do the guidelines work about your program, but as to where the TPEs are addressed, that is a benefit to you if you are using CAP 8 or NAEYC accredited.
Okay, I'm going to bridge a couple questions. So given that the permit, the focus is on the permit, not the credential, can you elaborate on how teaching 6 to 8-year-olds fits into this pilot?
I'm not sure I'm fully understanding. This is focused on the child development permit, which is typically used from 0 through preschool. There are some additional coursework and requirements if you want to add on to that a school age permit emphasis for working with children who are in that age range, but typically that is done in a before and after school setting. So this permit is primarily focused on up to the preschool and up to and including the preschool level.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. So there was a question saying what grade levels or age levels will the ECE credential cover?
There is no ECE credential at this time. Waiting for the master plan, for the ECE master plan work to be completed. It is very possible there could be an early childhood credential that is developed out of that work. We don't know at this time, so we would not know what grade levels.
Okay. Would CTC ever consider allowing directors with master's degrees or more to be able to obtain an administrative credential?
Angel, that's you. What are the requirements for someone to earn an administrative credential? What are the prerequisite credentials?
You are muted, Angel.
I'm going to help out with that because I think I know the answer. Angel will tell me if I'm wrong. The prerequisite credentials for an administrative credential are a multiple subject, a single subject, an education specialist, a pupil personnel services. It is a credential that has had preparation that included some practicum, and a child development permit is not an eligible credential as a prerequisite for an administrative credential.
Okay. Are programs whose candidates are in a master's program who already hold the credential or permit, would we be a good candidate for this pilot program?
So does the question mean that you already have candidates who hold a permit?
That is correct.
Well, if they already hold a permit, then I'm not sure what they're trying to achieve in the program. Are they trying to move up a level of the permit? This program or this pilot is focused on preparation for candidates who do not yet hold a teacher level permit, teacher level of the child development permit. If you have candidates who are working towards getting the teacher level of the permit, they do not presently have that level of permit, then that's what this pilot is focused on.
And there's a question about the current permit. Is that valid for at least the next 2 years?
The child development permits that a candidate has earned will remain valid.
And then, is the associate teacher permit at the teacher level?
No. That is at the assisting level of the permit structure. So if you have somebody in your program who holds the assistant or associate teacher permit, they are eligible to participate if they are trying to move up the ladder and get a teacher level permit.
And then I'm going to end with this one because they're kind of all overlapping. So, since all institutions have various support on their campuses for early childhood education and child development programs, how will the commission support this or the programs?
Can you repeat that since institutions have?
Sure. It says, since all institutions have various support on their campuses for early childhood and child development programs, how will the commission support them through this pilot?
Well, the commission's support throughout the pilot is to help bring institutions together, to help them communicate, to help them share learnings through the pilots, and to help support their understanding of what it means to be TPE aligned and to implement a program that is aligned with and congruent with a set of program guidelines or expectations for programs and the quality of those programs. That's the kind of support the commission can help bring to this.
Let me expand on that a little bit. I think the real benefit of participating in the pilot is if in 3 years down the road, the commission does make the decision that child development permits will no longer be awarded to someone who brings a transcript with 24 units and courses in these 3 topical areas. If instead, 4 years down the road, the commission says, no, someone must have completed a commission-approved program to get a child development permit, any institution that has participated in the pilot is going to be ready for that. They are going to be having a child development permit program that is ready to be approved by the commission at that point in time. So this is a transition time, and this is a way for some structured, supported work. And so for a 4-year institution, I do think you might want to participate if you have people working towards a teacher level permit, because then you would be completely ready and aligned if this does move into a commission approved program process where just a transcript of a grouping of courses is no longer acceptable. At that point in time, 3, 4, 5 years down the road, the VOC process would go away. You would have to become a commission-approved program to make the recommendation for the permit.
I think the attendees are they're getting confused about the child development permit. Yet there's mention in the PowerPoint of a credential. And so maybe if you could speak to, is there even a child development credential, or is there only a permit that exists? Maybe if you could speak to that, that might help.
At the current time, there is a permit structure that has been in place since I think 1993 or somewhere around there. That permit structure has 6 levels to it. And the job roles associated with that is what we've called out in our 2 presentations thus far: an assisting level, a teaching level, a mentoring and coaching level, and an administration level. That it remains at the level of a permit. It is not the same thing as a credential. There is presently an early childhood special education credential that candidates can earn. There is talk of an ECE credential that is being considered as a possibility, perhaps, by the Master Plan Committee. We don't have any information about where that's headed or how that is headed. But so at the present time, all of our discussion today has been focused on a permit and not on a credential. I don't know if Terry or someone wants to add to that explanation, or it's good enough.
We apologize if we did use the word credential and confuse the situation. That is one of the facts, is that the world we live in, we usually are talking about a credential. Actually, officially in our Title V regulations, a credential, a permit, an authorization, a document, it authorizes the holder to do something. But we are definitely talking about the child development permit as we're talking about this pilot.
Okay, well, Sarah, thank you very much for serving as our moderator for these questions. We really appreciate your attendance today. We're going to be looking at these questions and making sure that if we need to clarify something in our guidance document or any of the other pieces of information that we have posted on our website that you can access, we will do that. And I think Erin and Terry Clark both want to say something.
I do. I want to say something because it bubbled up in here, and it is a common question every time the commission opens any standard for any of our programs. And it is the person who asked, and it probably was asked a number of times, you know, what's going to happen to people's documents that they currently hold? So there is language in education code, there is statute that says that that a credential, if the requirements for a program are changed, the people that currently hold documents can continue to hold those documents that they've earned, even if we are going to start issuing new documents. Typically what happens is if program standards are changed, programs are given a period of time to phase those in, and current candidates then also have a period of time to either complete the program under the current requirements or have to move into what the new requirements are. But that document is a property right, actually, for folks. So once they've earned it, they get to maintain it. Or there's usually a bridge option for people who have the old document but maybe want to move into the new document, and then the commission would create some kind of a bridge to make it possible for people to move over. But the documents that people hold right now are safe.
And then the clarification I wanted to provide was about applying for the pilot. The submitting the electronic survey starts the clock ticking. So if the survey is submitted on October 5th, 60 days later, we're looking for appendices, I think it's B and C, or A and B, whichever appendices it is. 120 days after that date, we would be looking for the appendix on the next topic. So I was really encouraging in the chat today is hold on till webinars 3, 4, and 5. Get the rest of the information. We have intentionally split this into a number of different top webinars a couple weeks apart because it's a lot of information. And we could have done it in one big 8-hour thing, but we would overwhelm you completely more than we already have. So the next webinar in 3 weeks is all about the performance assessment work. And then 2 weeks after that is the webinar about the peer quality program review process. And then the Q&A webinar is really just allowing us to answer any question that's still not clear in your mind. So don't feel you have to go today to apply to be in the pilot. Anyone who wants to be in pilots 1 and 2 can get in.
Okay. I was just going to have you respond to that because I saw that there was, is there a limit to the number?
Anyone who wants to get in pilots 1 and 2 is thoroughly invited. The people who work on the design team for the TPA will be a smaller group, about 20 people, but everyone in the pilot will get information about the TPA and get to try out parts. And some institutions will get to pilot the TPA. Everyone who's in pilots 1 and 2 will get information about the program peer quality review process and will be able to suggest someone to sit on the panel. There'll be, again, be a design team of about 20 people or so who talk about and develop that peer quality program review process. So give us the next 2 webinars to get the rest of the information out to you.
All right, and with that, I think we've ended our webinar 2. We thank you very much for your participation, and we look forward to seeing you at webinar 3, October 23rd. Bye.